So we are here, very fortunate here, to be interviewing a researcher who's done quite a bit of work pertaining to children and dog bites and risks associated and whatnot.
Hello, my name is Sara Owczarczak-Garstecka, and during my PhD, I studied perception and prevention of dog bites, including to a small extent dog bites to children. However, the broad subject of my PhD applies to prevention of bites to children, even though children were not the primary focus of my study. I think that some of the findings may be applicable in this area as well.
Okay, that's exactly, I was going to ask you to say a bit about your work and whatnot, or what you do rather. So we're going to be talking about kind of two primary focuses of your work. Some of your qualitative research as part of your PhD, which I am still fascinated by. I'm so excited about this. I've been talking about it to everyone. And also one of the papers you published on actually very interesting, very novel, looking at bite clips are posted to YouTube, so YouTube videos. So that's kind of going to be our focus here. So I guess why don't we first sort of talk about what's the background to this research and why did you feel that it was necessary to be conducted?
Yeah, sure. So in the last 10 years, there were a lot of reports of increase in the number of dog bites within the general population, and increase in number of hospital admissions due to dog bites and strikes in the UK. We also know from a number of previous studies that the number of bites in the UK is associated with the levels of deprivation within community. So generally speaking, the more deprived communities also receive sort of greater number of dog bites than more affluent communities. At the same time, most of the previous studies about dog bites approach the subject from epidemiological perspective. And by this, I mean that the data were collected either through kind of population surveys or hospital admissions were kind of analyzed to identify risk factors related to victim and dog that are related to bites. And these studies kind of helped us to understand that dog bites are increasing in number. They also helped us to understand who is at most risk. So we know that it's primarily children, young children, kind of under the age of 8, but also teenagers. We know that there is a gender bias with young boys in particular being at greater risk. And we know the kind of annual trends around dog bites. So from these studies, we know, for example, that bites are more common around Christmas time and around summer holidays, perhaps because people spend more time with their dogs around those times. Another kind of strand of previous research about dog bites looked into evaluating impact of different interventions, primarily education-based interventions, on changing behaviors or perceptions of dogs. But we don't even know if education actually works in this context. We know that education doesn't work in all contexts. For example, we know that we shouldn't eat sweets every day, but we still do. We know that smoking is harmful, but people still smoke. So in this project, we've approached dog bites from qualitative perspective, by which I mean that I basically hanged around with people who are at high risk of bites due to their work and with dog owners, and interviewed them during kind of long, open-ended questions, interviews, to understand what are their experiences of being bitten, what do they actually do on day-to-day basis to stay safe around dogs, and to understand how being bitten impacted on their lives. So this kind of qualitative side of human experiences was missing, and this is why it was important to carry out this study. And this study was centered around Liverpool in the UK, and this is because this area has been identified as the dog bite capital of the UK. And I suspect this is mainly because it's also quite a deprived area of the UK, and as I mentioned, those two things are related.
Okay, Wow. Okay. That's a lot to take in. I should also say, sorry, I'm going out of order here and my dog is barking. We also with us today have Tiff Xiao, who's from our think tank. So she is certainly welcome to jump in and ask any follow-up questions that she would like to, given kind of the background to the work. And let me ask you really quickly. Now, I know that was the background to your qualitative, to the kind of the qualitative bit. Was that also what led you to do the YouTube analysis, video analysis as well? Or was that a bit of a tangent?
Most of the research was qualitative, but I've also used quantitative methods. I've analyzed a database of work-based accidents that left people out of work for at least 2 weeks, kind of looking at dog bite. And whilst waiting for ethical approval to do my qualitative research, I went ahead and analyzed YouTube videos that capture dog bites, purely because you don't really need the same ethical approval to carry out the study because data is already available. And we've identified videos online that show dog bites to different groups of people. And we've looked into what happens before a bite on those videos. So what dogs are doing, what changes in dog behavior and posture are visible. And we've also looked at what people were doing before the bite. And that was one publication. And in a separate publication, we used qualitative methods to analyze comments under those videos, to explore viewers' perceptions of bites and what happens in those situations.
I think it's fascinating because, like you said, a lot of the research in this field that looks at bites to anyone, but we're here specifically talking about bites to children. You're right, it's from the human medical literature and it doesn't tell us much. We tend to know more about the victim to the child than we know about the dog. So we can't learn a lot from there. And then the fact that you've gone and done a lot of qualitative work, much of my own research is qualitative in nature, so it's particularly appealing to me. But yeah, there's certainly so much to be gained, as we're gonna learn here. So what are the key findings or results from all of this work? So from the qualitative work, my God, I have pages of notes that I took when we chatted initially, and then of course the YouTube study as well. So I mean, I know what I think is like the most interesting, but I'm really keen to hear what you think are the really important findings from it.
Gosh, there's quite a lot of findings, and because they were qualitative in nature, they're a little bit tricky to summarize succinctly, but I will do my best. So in short, based on the research of videos, we do know that not all dogs show many signs of kind of incoming bites in the 20 seconds or so before the bite occurs. And this is problematic because many educational interventions are based on teaching signs of body language, suggesting the dog may be distressed and may bite. We also do know that some dogs, about 20% do show signs, do show sort of postural changes before biting and kind of, show their teeth and so on. So we do know that those changes are visible, and we also know that a lot of bites happen in the context of leaning over the dog or handling dog or petting the dog. A lot of bites also happen in the context of play, and this context hasn't been kind of highlighted as much in the past. And in that study, we've identified that a lot of those who were bitten in the context of play are kind of judged by us as roughly teenage age. So there might be something around teenagers interacting with pet dogs in a particular way that may create this risk of a bite. From the qualitative analysis of those videos, we know that people tend to blame the victim for a bite or the dog owner, and a bite to a child was also often seen as a reflection of bad parenting. So it wasn't just, so those comments didn't just capture that you're a bad owner, but they also suggested that those people who let their child be bitten were also bad parents. And together, those two things add up to bites being very stigmatized, and may kind of hinder seeking help for kind of potential aggression or child-dog interactions in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So these I think are the main findings from the kind of YouTube papers, and the other qualitative work showed us that bites are happening within kind of a system of social connections, if you like. So it isn't just that individual can be responsible for preventing a bite, because their relations with friends, colleagues, and families may impact their risk and how they interact with a dog, how they assess the risk that the dog may pose. So, and that includes a relationship with a dog as well. So, for example, people who have worked in veterinary practices and who are bitten sometimes said that they have noticed at the time of interacting with a dog that the dog was behaving in kind of a stressed way and out of character, and they were worried about their behavior. But because they have interacted with the dog in the past, they ignored those clues and kind of proceeded as they would otherwise, because they acted on the basis of their prior experience with the dog rather than on the basis of what they were seeing in front of them. So we know that history of relationship with a dog changes how we assess trust in a dog, and we often interact with dogs on the basis of trust. We've also learned that a lot of people, we often say that people have to be responsible dog owners, but it's a very tricky word, because I think all dog owners consider themselves responsible. We found out indeed that most people find themselves responsible, but they were not always able to act in a responsible way. So there was a lot of kind of physical things that they needed to be able to do to enact the responsible dog ownership in public. So, for example, they had to be able to notice dog behavior. They had to be able to manipulate the dog in a particular way. And they had to be able to kind of anticipate what may happen in the future, rather than just kind of morally feel that they are responsible. So this was tricky as well. And we also identified that in terms of interactions with dogs, people typically rely on their intuition and emotions when trying to make themselves safe. So they would talk a lot about fear being contagious, or trying to manage their body in such a way to stay safe around dogs, because they thought that fear will be transmitted through their kind of actions. So there was a lot of discussion of like emotional management as important to safety around dogs. I think these were the kind of key main findings, but within each of these findings, there were many other sub-findings that may be of relevance to children.
Yeah. So, so there are, you've covered a lot of the really important things. And I kind of, if it's okay, wanted to kind of touch on a few, kind of side things that you and I had talked about before that I find particularly interesting. So one of the things that you had mentioned before, and you've just mentioned now, was that the history outweighs the current situation. So I know you had given an example before of someone, a dog owner, who knew her dog wasn't good with kids. It was a source of anxiety. It was probably not going to be a good and safe situation, both unsafe for the child and not good for the dog's welfare. But yet she continued to, I think you said, take the dog to a park, I believe. She continued to do the same thing. And I thought that was so important. Like, so I don't know, did you?
Yeah, I know which example you mean. I can elaborate on that. So we've identified that people see risk differently, right? When we think about dog bite prevention, we think that the risk is to the victim or to the child. And the source of risk is effectively a dog. But to some dog owners, if they are very bonded with their dogs and they have a particular type of relationship with their dog, they may see their dog to be at risk. If they are attacked by another dog, and that risk in their head may kind of outweigh the risk of a dog causing injury to other person. So in that example, that dog owner was aware that her dog was showing a number of problematic behaviors in a range of contexts, and wasn't very good with children. However, she has heard about a kind of very violent attack of a dog on another dog, and she became very, very fearful that her dog will be attacked. So for this reason, she stopped walking her dog in an area where she thought her dog may be attacked by another dog, and carried on walking her dog in kind of a park or an area that was visited by children and young families quite often. And she said that this is a potential risk, but she's kind of willing to take it on because her dog is safe there from being attacked by other dogs, sorry. And she's also said that I've asked about muzzling her dog, and she said that she would not consider muzzling her dog because in case something happens, her dog wouldn't have a way to defend themselves. And she also thought that muzzling the dog kind of interferes with the dog enjoying themselves outside, that they're not able to pick up toys or sticks. And that perception of, muzzle hindering a dog being a dog and enjoying themselves outside really impacted how she managed that dog outside, and potentially contributed to a risk of a bite to children or bystanders, really.
No, yeah, I think that's so interesting. It's like two different bits of your brain running parallel. There's history and the dog, but on the other hand, you're still putting your dog into a situation that could be dangerous. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I can give you another example.
Sure.
Another participant who had a very detailed knowledge of bites to postal workers because of nature of his job. He was not a postal worker, but he did know how those bites occur. And a lot of those bites occur in the context of a letterbox. So a postal worker would be putting their hand through a letterbox, and the dog on the other side will just bite their hand. So even though it's an injury just to a hand, because it's usually the dominant hand, those injuries can really impact on postal workers' lives. And that person was telling me how she knows on this subject. And then later on in an interview, he said that the only thing he doesn't like about his dog is that his dog attacks the letters that are coming through the letterbox inside his house and just grabs them and shreds them into pieces. So I asked whether he's ever been worried about his dog attacking a postal worker in that context, even if the dog wouldn't attack that person in any other situation. And he said that would never happen because his dog would know that there is a hand involved and would stop sort of short of biting. And I think that's quite implausible. I think that a lot of bites in those contexts are not necessarily by dogs who are generally aggressive and kind of fearful towards people. It's just a very, very specific situation that may just apply to a lot of dogs. So I think it was quite problematic or potentially difficult thing to manage because that perception of his dog being safe kind of outweighed that particular context in which the dog could attack. And that person also mentioned that he knows that his dog is safe because they had that dog since the dog was a puppy, and they've seen that dog interact in hundreds of different contexts, and he was always very, very friendly, very, very well behaved, very kind of relaxed around people. So therefore, he hasn't considered that context to kind of outweigh the history of that dog. So they decided not to do anything about preventing attacks on Mayo.
I think that this is, first of all, super interesting in general, and I think it's incredibly relevant to bite risk to children. So certainly, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of the way that I'm thinking it relates to this story is perhaps some people, think that in the case of kids, my child has always climbed into bed with my dog, into the dog's bed. It has always been okay. My dog would never bite a child because I know my dog. So therefore, I'm going to continue to let my child climb into the dog's bed. When in fact, we know that these sort of passive benign behaviors often lead to bites, to injuries. But I think that my dog's okay because I know my dog, and he would never do that. He would never bite a child.
No, I think you're spot on with this. I think that's exactly what might be happening in many of those situations, that we almost like accept that the dog was fine, so we don't really pay attention or maybe ignore the signs that the dog is not fine on that particular occasion, because we have this robust history of safe interactions that almost makes it very difficult to intervene in that given moment.
Yes.
And when a child is climbing the dog, or when the dog may have a bad day, it might be that it's just after New Year's Eve and a dog has been already kind of on edge because of fear of fireworks sound, and then the child climbs a dog and the dog reacts differently to how they reacted over the number of years. Or a dog may have aged, and in previous year a dog may have tolerated those behaviors, but now maybe they have arthritis or kind of other painful condition, or they may not see as clearly, and they may behave differently, and kind of we haven't explored this specifically, but I think it does work and it makes sense based on other things we kind of uncovered in this research. We also found that, and we know that a lot of bites to children by dogs that they are familiar with. These may be dogs that they live with, or dogs of their neighbors or kind of grandparents. So dogs that they visit regularly, but maybe don't know kind of that intimately. And it could be that in those situations, grandparents or neighbors think that, that the child was always fine with the dog, or the dog was always fine with children. And they kind of won't be able to anticipate that behavior may change over time.
Okay. No, I think there's so much here. So there are two other things I kind of want to touch on in this. One of the things you mentioned was that sometimes it seems that children maybe do okay if they have a dog in their own house. They do okay with that dog, and there are certain kind of rules around what's appropriate to do with the dog, how to interact. So things are generally good. They maybe go to a family member's house or a friend's house who also has a dog, and all those things they know, right? And they do, a good job of go out the window.
It could be, or it could be that that the dogs has different levels of kind of acceptance or different things that they can cope with, and they are used to rules for their dog, and then they go to a different house when they are already confident about dogs, but they interact with a dog that won't be able to tolerate the same range of behaviors or the same kind of style of interactions, and perhaps put themselves at risk. And it might be that if you're a parent and you're sending your dog to a child's friend's house, and the parents say like, oh, we have a dog, you might be even like reassuring the parent, saying like, oh, we have a dog too, my child is okay with dogs, they're confident, without thinking that my child might be okay with my dog that is particularly okay with my child, rather than generally dog savvy. There's another thing that we've uncovered during the study that was around sort of social expectations of child dog interactions. Very kind of interest.
This is, I think what you're going to say is the next bit that I was going to bring up, which is one of my favorite parts. Sorry, go on.
So again, the study wasn't about this, but this came up during one of the interviews, and it was actually during a few interviews, and it was a big part of those interviews. So there is a certain expectation about children getting on with dogs, and I think that is portrayed in Disney films, on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram Reels, you name it. We see plentiful of videos where dogs are taking care of children, or supporting children, or being a kickside to kids interacting outside. And there is this narrative that dogs should get on with children, and some dog owners in my study expected their dog to get on with children, and really wanted their dog to get on with children. And one of my participants, who luckily had quite a small dog, described a situation where the dog was quite stressed because they took the dog to kind of an outdoor festival. So it was quite loud and noisy and there was a lot of people. And the little girl started to interact with the dog. And she said that this interaction was going on and on and on for quite a while. And she could see that her dog is getting more and more stressed. But she absolutely adored that moment because she really wanted her dog to have those positive interactions with children. And it was really important to her that she sees that and that her dog can do it. And so she didn't intervene, ended up with the child. And she was very upset about this, but again, she really wanted her dog to have those interactions with children. And she described a second occasion where her dog bit a child, and it was in exactly the same circumstances, actually in exactly the same park. During a different festival. Again, her dog was very stressed about those interactions. Again, it was a little girl who approached and she was hugging and kissing her dog, and her dog lasted for quite a while. And then bit the child again, and the same thing happened for the third time. And she said that she could tell that her dog was distressed, but to her it was just so important that her dog gets on with children that she didn't want to intervene or change it because she hoped for the best. And I think that might be like an issue, or it might be an expectation within at least some dog owners that their dog should get on with children. And we know from some of the analysis of YouTube comments that there was an expectation that the dog should know better but to harm a child. So it might not be something that many dog owners believe in, but it's definitely something that some owners will kind of think, and something that might guide their actions and how they manage their dogs around children.
I think from my perspective, I think this is hands down one of the most important findings of your work. I mean, I think we can see it in the way, and again, I certainly don't mean to take words out of your mouth or misinterpret, but I would think that kind of we can see it in the way within a household, within a family, the way that a dog has a relationship with those children. You're right. You see it everywhere. You see it through movies, through books, through TV, through social media, that this dog and this child have this very specific relationship, right? Like we have this one narrative, and this is how it has to be. So we see that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you're right. Even if the dog doesn't live with children, that when you're out walking your dog, that you know, kids want to come up. They want to interact with the dog. You know, I think a lot of parents possibly, you know, don't want their kids to be afraid of dogs. So they want to encourage them. When in fact, that often isn't safe. And isn't in the interest of the welfare of the dog, but the person who's walking the dog, might just really want their dog to be okay with kids.
I think there might be another factor as well, because what we did find out very strongly in all the qualitative interviews is that there's almost one narrative of why a dog behaves in the way they do, and it's sort of following that the dog is as good as the owner. And of course, owners' management and training impacts on dog behavior, but it's not the only thing that impacts on that dog behavior. You know, like we do know that one of the main factors contributing to aggression is genetics. And I'm not talking about breeds, I'm talking about genetics of particular lines of dogs. And we know that parentage of a dog has a huge impact on their behavior, and this is not something necessarily directly within dog owners' control. They can obviously source a dog responsibly, but even in my study, I've interviewed a few people who sourced their dogs extremely responsibly, and they've done absolutely everything they could have done to have a perfect dog, and they did not have a perfect dog. They had a dog who has bitten multiple people on a number of occasions, and you know, you couldn't think of anything that they could have done differently. So this narrative that dog is as good as the owner may be contributing to owners feeling like they can't say that my dog doesn't like children, because it might be taken as a reflection on the owner being not liking children. And you cannot possibly say that you don't like children, because you know that would be awful. So I love children, but I think that stigma around dog behaving badly as a reflection of owner's character, maybe contributing to owners' ability to manage boundaries between dogs and children in public.
I think that's amazing. And so fascinating. And I think it's also to say that it's, even if it's not appropriate or safe for anyone, for the child to come up and come very close to the dog, there are other ways that children can still appreciate a dog from a distance. So for my example, I have a very nervous, very large dog, and he's probably okay with kids, but he's a very nervous dog. So I used to walk him around the suburban neighborhood, and there were kids that would always want to come up and say hi and pet him. And I said, no, like he's kind of a nervous dog, but I didn't want them to be afraid. So we had a thing where they would stand across the street, so a good, I don't know, many meters away, and they would wave to him as we walked by. And it was very passive. They interacted with him. They knew that he was there. They acknowledged that he was there, but they could wave and stand quietly, and we kept on walking. So I think that it's important to know that it's not that kids, with the dog, go run the other way. It's just, not all kids need to run up and say hi to every single dog.
Yeah, I agree. I think it kind of works almost both ways. I think that another thing that came up from my research is from people who were bitten by dogs in public, who, that there might be an expectation that everyone should love dogs and everyone should want to interact with dogs. And that's problematic because not everyone wants to interact with dogs on every single occasion they see a dog, and not everyone will want to have a dog jumping up all around them in the park every time they are there. But equally, I think an equally problematic expectation is that all children should be allowed to interact with dogs and all dogs should be okay with children. I think these are kind of two sides of the same coin that maybe kind of contributing to risky situations and how people manage their dogs. And also, I think just the other day I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about biases in perception. So, for example, if someone does something that irritates us, we tend to think that it's a reflection of their personality, and we very rarely see that it might be related to the context of that situation. So, if someone cuts us shortly when we're driving, we usually will think that it's because they are an awful person, not because, their wife is pregnant and about to give birth and they need to get to hospital as soon as possible. And I think the same goes for like managing dogs. And when a dog is aggressive, people often will think that, it's something wrong with a dog or it's something wrong with the owner. And maybe only later they will think that actually there was something around the context of that interaction that created that situation. So it goes back to kind of avoiding saying that some dogs are good with children or some dogs are, safe, because any dog can be good with children, but if you put them in a stressful enough situation, they may snap.
Well, that actually segues really nicely, I think, into my next question, which is, based on your research, what are the practical applications or implications for shelters and rehoming organizations? And actually, if I may add to that, why I think this is a really nice segue is I think we often hear, because we want this narrative, right? We want this narrative of this dog is good with children, good with children, good with children. Then we sometimes hear things, at least I do, kind of anecdotally thrown around like, oh, this dog is bulletproof. Oh, this dog is good with all kids, in kind of this rehoming context. So anyway, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what do you think? What do you think the findings of your research mean practically for shelters and rehoming organizations?
I think there are a few things that we can take away. One of them is to stop labeling dogs or breeds of dogs as good with children or bad with children. I think we just need to step away from those labels, because those labels are always based on our observations, which are situated in a particular context. And we don't know if the dog will be good with all children all the time. So we can just say that, that the dog has interacted in a particular way with children, and we can create those descriptions based on context rather than label that dog as good or bad with children. So that might be something that can be used when creating descriptions of dogs for adoption. I think that may also have implication on advising about age of children that a dog is suitable to live with, because the 6-year-olds that I know are very different in behavior. So some of them would probably not be suitable to live with a dog that is, labeled as okay to live with children age 6 or more. And other 6-year-olds may be absolutely fine with dogs that may be showing even more complex behavior that are advertised for adoption with older children. So I think it's all about a match between a child and a dog. Within reason, of course, because if a dog has shown, aggression towards children, then it's probably good to avoid placing them within a family. I think it's also probably quite important to address stigma around seeking help for dog behavior and blaming people for dog behavior, because in the long run, this will mean that problematic behavior are just going to continue and won't be addressed. So there is a need to kind of change the way we talk about dog being as good as the owner, and emphasize the whole context and multiple layers that make up dog behavior, and kind of step away from just saying that it's just all on owner. And kind of leading from this, we do know that you can do a lot to prevent bites, but some bites may still happen, and there are things that can be done as a way of introducing passive safety, so safety that's not dependent on our behavior, that can keep children and dogs safe. And this would include simply installing baby gates or all sorts of room dividers in the house, and making sure that dogs are not in the same space as children when they cannot be actively closely supervised and monitored. So I think these will be kind of the core applications.
Okay. All right. Good. That's really, really helpful, because we know, for example, that a lot of shelters and homing organizations have very strict policies about the age of children that they adopt, age of children in the home that they will adopt any dog out to. So yeah, to kind of be mindful that maybe these kind of blanket age policies aren't right for all dogs. So yeah. Okay.
I think it's really, really difficult, because obviously rehoming organizations are dependent on donations from the public, and these donations are dependent on organization's reputation, and well-publicized bites to a child may completely ruin that organization's reputation and kind of hinder any rehoming work that they're doing. So I can see why a lot of organizations got into a place where most dogs cannot be rehomed to families with children. I can see the rationale for this, but I do think that possibly as a result, those families then seek dogs elsewhere from sort of less safe sources, or from places where they won't be able to access behavioral support from people who know well how to support those families. So I think there is space for kind of negotiation between organizational risk and rehoming to families with children.
Okay. Well, then that leads us to our next point, which is what are the practical applications or implications for dog adopters or owners based on the results of your research? And I'm sure there's loads of overlap. We've touched on a lot already. But yeah, there's specific kind of things that you wanted to note.
Yeah, I think the main one, again, is not relying on your own behavior and ability to manage your dog at all time, and trying to generate an environment that can work a little bit in your favor. So if you have a child and a dog, then do install baby gates or room dividers, so you don't have to monitor them at all times. And also do anything you can within that dog's environment to make sure that that dog is kind of happy. So develop, a crate or a safe corner where a child can't access and a dog can. And if a dog is reactive to the outside world, it might be worth to kind of use some kind of frosting on windows so that reactivity is kept to minimum, which should theoretically lower the trigger stacking and make the context more manageable. So try to make the environment work in your favor as much as possible. And if there are any issues, kind of try to seek help as quickly as possible for the dog, because there's always something that can be done, and the stigma can drive parents in particular, I think, away from seeking help and trying to manage those relationships better. I think it's also worth remembering that that we assess risk in dog interaction based on trust. So we would probably be better off looking at dog behavior in that given moment rather than acting on the basis of past behaviors, and try to remember that our perception of risk is biased in this way. So almost try to introduce a little bit of doubt in how we assess dog behavior, because I think that a lot of dog owners can identify that the dog is stressed, but they will often not necessarily act on it because the dog was always fine. And that may also apply to, if people are taking the dog to family or neighbors, and the child is going to interact with another dog. Try to make sure that the child is not going to approach the dog the same way as they approach the family dog, just to kind of be safe. And there might be also one thing that we keep on talking about, people being responsible dog owners, but this involves ability to act responsibly, like physically act responsibly. So there might be some things that owners could learn, for example, how to recall their dog, or how to ask their dog politely to stay behind the baby cage when the doorbell rings. That those skills they may lack, and teaching those skills specifically, almost aside from teaching them anything about dog behavior, could be helpful in terms of safety.
So some proactive kind of tools in your toolbox, exactly. in terms of this, because we don't know, no dog, there's so much that goes into risk, and so we don't know, any dog could potentially cause harm. So having said that, erring on the side of caution, working proactively with your dog, so that, you have kind of a good system in place, and then of course managing your environment. Okay, so my final question is, based on your research, what do you think are the most useful directions for future research?
I think one thing that it needs a lot of research is to, and I know this research is already underway, which is really, really exciting, is to learn more about how children interact with dogs through observations and questionnaires, and so on and so forth. Because I think in terms of managing children around dogs, we often work on assumptions on how children interact with dogs, but it would be very helpful to have more details about why children do things that they do, and how they interact with dogs. So one thing would be to have more research around child-dog interactions. And another part would be to have more research around how dog owners understand supervision of children around dogs, and what do they do when they say that they supervise dogs. And then kind of on the other side would also be, how do we teach the supervision that we want to see? Because just being in the same room as a child and a dog may not be adequate supervision. The supervision may have to be more intense, and it may have to be more direct, more close. And we just don't know what parents understand as supervising dogs with children. So I think there is a need for further research in this area to kind of understand, firstly, what parents are doing, and then how to improve it if it needs improvement.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think those, and that's actually a theme that's come up with a few research I've chatted to in this field, who also we're going to be interviewing, is, what does supervision mean? Yeah. What does it actually mean? So yeah, okay. Well, Tiff, did you have any other, sorry, I've just yeah, there's just, I don't know, there's so much that I could talk about, so I could go on for ages or asking questions. But Tiff, was there anything else that you were wondering about or had any questions or comments on or anything?
No, I that was so fascinating, and I feel like you guys both spoke very concisely and efficiently about the topic. So anytime I had a question, you guys kind of answered it, and I'm just thinking about how this kind of research sits into my world of sheltering and training and behavior. But you guys touched on all the points that is, things we're already doing, like promoting management and such.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, is there anything, Sarah, that that you wanted to add that we haven't touched on? Or like I said, there's so much. I seriously could just talk to you for hours about this. But in the interest of time, is there anything else that you feel that's important that you wanted to note on?
I think maybe just that a lot of issues with dog bite prevention may be down to blaming people, and the more we can move away from blaming to understand what we can learn from things and how we can improve things, the less stigma will be involved, and possibly the better will be, the bite prevention will be improved as a result. So stop blaming people.
Yeah. I mean, if your dog does do something, cause a bite or an injury, doesn't mean you're a bad owner, doesn't mean it's a bad dog. It just means that, there's just some
point as well.
Sorry, go on.
I just remembered.
Okay.
Just because dog bite prevention requires so many different institutions and organizations to work together, like many parents whose children were bitten will have to take their dog to the hospital, and that might be the first port of contact in terms of helping that dog or helping that family relationship. So in terms of preventing bites to children, it will be very important to work with different organizations, and not just dog shelters, but also almost like surgeons, plastic surgeons who operate on those children, to make sure that they give the best advice possible, to make sure that they know, that a dog can be referred to a clinical behaviorist or an expert in this area. I think it's really important to have that information in hospitals. I think it's really important that this information is available to schools, to nurseries, and kind of anyone who comes into contact with children who might be injured by dogs, because if those different organizations have a different message for parents, then it will be very hard to manage the situations in the future. So I think there is a need for like a coordinated approach.
No, I totally agree. If everyone's on a different page, it's just like we say in dog training. If everyone in the house tells dogs to do something differently, it's not gonna go well. So no, I think you're exactly right. And I think that kind of the takeaway in terms of what page would be great to be on, the right page to all be on from your research, is that there's no shame if something goes wrong. And there's also no shame, I think, in doing the preventive things and erring on the side of caution. And if something does go awry, it's not a reflection of you as an owner, or as an organization. So it's not a reflection of the organization, and to seek the support that exists, positive reinforcement-based training, behavior specialists, veterinary behaviorists, etc. Because the sport, there's so many good resources out there. A lot of them will go on our website. But yeah, there is help. There is support, and kind of a path forward, I guess, that's not all negative. So anyway, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time chatting with me today, before, etc. Yeah, and all of your various resources and whatnot will go up on our website in due course. Tiff, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll keep in touch with you, Sarah. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.